All right. So just a few years ago, a project team from Stanley Black & Decker went out into the field, into a construction site, and they saw what people have probably seen for decades. They saw lots of people at work. They saw their cordless 20-volt power tools being used, and they saw extension cords to power the tools that took 120 volts, like miter saws and table saws, extension cords dragging all across the construction site, sometimes hundreds of feet. Or they had generators that they'd bring on that were loud and noisy and caused pollution and were a danger in themselves. And the project team went back and they wanted to figure out what they could do about that. The issue was, although the workers said they loved the cordless stuff, they couldn't use the cordless stuff, 20 volt, for these tools that needed 120 volts. And they already had, Black & Decker already had a large installed base of battery tools with their DeWalt line. So they came up with something called the FlexVolt system. And the FlexVolt system has just some circuitry in there that when you push it into a 20-volt tool, it runs 20 volts and it runs it like this. There's 15 batteries inside the battery pack, so it runs 5 batteries, each of 4 volts. It runs them in series. That gives you 20 volts. And if you plug it into something that needs 60 volts, it senses that, and it wires those 15 batteries times 4 volts in series, and that gets you 60 volts. And if you need 120 volts, you just use 2 of those battery packs. So it was a one-solution battery platform that worked with all the existing tools that they had installed, and it worked with all the future stuff. And it was a profound impact. Within a year and a half of introducing this new line, they generated over $300 million in incremental sales. And it's had a big impact on the construction industry. This is just a 57-second video, but it conveys the utility these tools bring. And you don't have to be a tool person. I'm not. I can use a hammer, sort of. But this gives you an appreciation for the problem that these new tools and this new battery platform solved.
In stressful environments, to be able to trust your coworker that they're going to accomplish a task that literally your life is going to be hanging off of, it's super important.
And that creates a really powerful team.
We're working in really remote environments, and the ability to be cord-free, it's a massive benefit for us. So to have battery power where we can run every tool offers flexibility, efficiency, productivity, and then safety. And therefore you can work in even more challenging environments. It's this project that other companies or contractors look at and go, holy crap, we can't touch this. I have no idea where to start. That's what I like. I thrive on that stuff. DeWalt FlexVolt tools gives us the freedom to build anything, anywhere.
So it's not rocket science to solve, first of all, to identify the problem. I mean, we've all tripped over extension cords, and I'm sure we all have cordless tools. So that problem's well known. And honestly, the technology they came up with isn't rocket science either. But the reason they were able to do it is because the company says of really one thing: alignment. Stanley Black & Decker historically is always one of the top innovative companies, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But when you think about alignment, there's really kind of 4 pillars that need to be considered, and we know this: structure, how the company's organized, who reports to who; strategy, what they're working on from a business perspective, as well as their innovation strategy; culture, of course, and and process. And when things work together, well, we know what it's like when things don't work together, or at least I do, because I've worked in a lot of companies where things have not worked together. I have some crazy stories, and we probably all do. But when things do work together, it's an overused metaphor, but it is like you're operating on all cylinders. Everybody's contributing, everybody's sharing the load, everybody's cooperating, and it has a profound impact on what a business can do. There's a study that's done pretty much year after year, and it's been going on for over 15 years now. It's done by Strategy and a consulting group within Price Waterhouse. They study the Global Innovation 1000. It's basically the 1,000 companies that are spending the most on R&D. And this is what the last 10 or so years have looked like, and we recognize all those names, I'm sure. I want to go right to the conclusion and tell you what they've learned over nearly 20 years of in-depth study looking at all kinds of metrics at all these companies. The takeaway, the conclusion in a sentence is that there's no correlation between the amount of money a company spends and its on innovation and its performance in the market. And that's based on a number of different metrics. The total dollars they spend on R&D, or percent of revenue dollars. There's no correlation. And what does matter is probably something instinctively we all know. It's having the right. It's doing the right things, and we've talked a lot about that. It's having the right people and the right processes, right? And then underpinning all of that is strategy, alignment for innovation. So there are really 6 characteristics that those top innovation companies have in common year after year after year. First one is their business strategy is aligned with their innovation strategy, right? And interestingly enough, when they surveyed those 1,000 companies, only about half say that their innovation strategy is lined up with their business strategy, right? So a misalignment would be if you're in a declining market, but you still are expected to grow by double digits, but that's your business strategy, but your innovation strategy is just doing incremental improvement stuff, right? That's a misalignment. The second thing is culture. And coincidentally, of the 1,000 top innovation companies, only about half say that they're culturally, that they're aligned for innovation. And 20% of the companies say their cultures are basically completely misaligned. And there's 2 things that companies need to really, that are indicative of their cultures being aligned for innovation. One of them is that they have a close relationship with their customers. We saw that with Stanley Black & Decker. And the second thing is the company cares very much about the products, about the services they provide and what they offer, right? They're obsessed with providing great solutions and tools that assist people, right? And we can name a bunch of companies that are like that come to mind. They're the ones that are on the top of the innovation list. The third thing is top leadership needs to be involved. Gosh, I have so many stories. We all do, I'm sure, where leadership says they're interested in innovation, says they're interested in product development and next generation products, but they're so closely bound to quarterly results, or they're just so myopic that stuff constantly gets killed. And I could rather than tell you a story, I'll show you a Dilbert cartoon, right? So here's the pointy-haired boss talking about what we need is a overarching strategy to drive innovation. And Dilbert says, yeah, or we could just stop, smothering what we already have here. He said, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, right? So I've lived that many times, and I'm sure we all have. The fourth thing is there's a close involvement with the customer. The top execs at Stanley Black & Decker say they want to involve their project teams, their entry-level engineers all the way on up with the customer in the field from the very beginning of the concept and all the way through. And that actually is unique. I mean, a lot of people talk about being close to the customer, but typically it's not done that way. The fifth thing is there's metrics like we've talked about here, like we saw some of the subcontractors here exhibiting. There's tools so that things get approved that have the most merit, right? It's not who has the biggest paycheck in the room or who has the loudest voice or who has the pet project that gets done, right? Everything is objectively assessed and everything is measured and has to have the merit to proceed to the next level. And the sooner a project is killed, the better, right? And the last thing, and this is somewhat of an intangible, but it's super important, and we all can think of companies that have done this, is there's the best companies use those previous 5 things and combine them in an entirely unique way to really enchant the customer. And that's what creates passionate, raving fans. So, wow, we've seen a lot of stuff over the 2 days. And, the question is, what is innovation? And very broadly, we know that innovation is not just about science and technology, although that's really what we focused on here. But innovation actually, broadly, is relevant to all aspects of all our lives. Certainly how we work, how we play, how we socialize, how we engage with our families, and how we parent. In fact, innovative thinking has been at the core of every improvement throughout history. In fact, long before recorded history. So what is innovation? Well, innovation is looking at something you've seen countless times before and seeing something new, something that for whatever reason you didn't see before. It's the missing puzzle piece hiding in plain sight. And sometimes that missing piece is found by the power alone of pure imagination, which is a uniquely human characteristic, something we all share, as was the case when Watson and Crick imagined a spiral staircase on their way to co-discovering the structure of the DNA molecule. Innovation is combining things in new ways to create something new. And sometimes one new combination can have a 10x improvement, or even more, right? Much greater. And simply and broadly, innovation is also story. Story provides the narrative to help us understand our environment, help us communicate. Story provides the culture, really. Stories can be old, passed down from generation to generation, seemingly hardwired into our thinking, or stories can be new. There's an old Native American Hopi Indian proverb that says, "Those who tell the stories rule the world." And that's true today. We have to be vigilant about accuracy because so much of what we know is actually wrong. Innovators develop a new awareness of the stories that are told, and innovators tell their own stories. Innovation is discerning order from chaos, right? You look at that back wall and you think about your jobs and all the messes you're struggling with. Discerning order from chaos is what allows us to formulate chemicals, cure disease, control the dynamics of flight. We're inundated with information. Author Clay Shirky says the problem isn't information overload, the problem's filter failure. And overall, we're doing pretty good. I mean, we're living in the greatest time to be alive. Now, if you look at these dots, they look like they're moving slowly in a semicircular motion. But if we apply a little bit of filtering here, you can see they're actually moving back and forth along a straight line. So, as I said, we're doing pretty good with our processing of information. We are living in the most abundant and safest time to be alive, although you might not get that from the news. It doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of problems in the world. There certainly are. But the better we're able to separate signal from noise, the better we're able to prevent and prepare for problems and advance the future and help others. Innovation is courage also. The American artist Chuck Close could draw with a pencil with such exactitude and precision that an 11 by 9 foot pencil drawing of his is virtually indistinguishable from a photograph. And after suffering a debilitating stroke that left him paralyzed and wheelchair bound and only able to move a hand a couple inches, it's courage that allowed Chuck Close to strap a paintbrush to his one hand and reinvent himself as a painter, painting a small grid by small grid, and in the process reinvent large portraiture painting. This recently sold for $3.4 million. So courage is also required for innovation. Innovation is curiosity, and it stalls when complacency begins. When the student stops learning, when the teacher knows enough, when the need to appear right or congruent with the past exceeds the confidence required to make a change or admit you were wrong. Innovation is deconstructing and disassembling. The architect Frank Gehry looked back at hundreds of years of buildings and how they were constructed, all the right angles and flat planes and two-dimensional drawings, with the result being that we live, all of us, and work basically in boxes. And Frank Gehry reimagined what a building could be. Certainly structural integrity, a place to provide utility for water, light, and septic. And he added unfettered inspiration from nature, from art, and even from the folds of a blanket that have comforted every child. And lastly, innovation can be very easy at times or incredibly difficult. In 1964, a young Paul McCartney woke up from a dream with a song, a melody entirely formed in his head. He went to the piano alongside his bed and figured out the chords. He wasn't sure if he'd heard it before, but he knew it like he did. For the next 3 weeks, he played it for everybody he knew, but nobody heard the song. And it was only then that he was convinced that it was an original song. And the song Yesterday went on to be the most covered song in the history of recorded music, and Rolling Stone magazine has called it the #1 pop song of all time. Conversely, as we know, innovation can be very difficult. The disposable products company Bic learned this when they launched a product they thought was going to be another slam dunk, disposable adult underwear. Maybe people thought it'd leave a mark, or they'd get cut, or they'd get burned. But in any event, nobody bought them. So the question is really, what is innovation? I didn't quite have a single answer, but I wanted to find one for today. It's difficult after hearing all the things we talked about. But I do know innovation has been at the core of our existence, as I said, since before recorded history. And I think innovation is really what makes us human. And like the heart beating inside everybody's chest here, right? We remain virtually unaware that it's there, day in and day out, doing its work, beating 3.2 billion times if we live to be 80 years old. And just like you can dramatically improve your cardiovascular capability, you can dramatically improve, as we've all done and we're all doing, our ability to create and innovate. What's at stake? Well, for a business and a company, the opportunity to drive innovation, create great products, and leapfrog your competition and make money. If you're an organization, the chance to create a culture of creativity where people thrive and accomplish great things. But most importantly, what's at stake for the individual, for each of us, is a chance to have a better life and have an impact. So thank you very much. I have a book I'll give to everybody if you'd like it. It's a pretty cool 52-page book with lots of cool photographs. In fact, there's a building of Frank Gehry's. Well, that's not it, but there's a picture of Frank Gehry's building in there, and there's a picture of Chuck Close there, that, a bunch of stuff. You just have a little, just give me your email, and I'll send it to you. And thank you all very much, and thank Langdon and company for having me out. I've learned so much, and it's great to be associated with all of you.